Imagine you work behind a bar. A woman comes up to you and orders a gin and tonic for herself, but as you move your head forward, you unmistakably see a baby bump. Do you serve her alcohol as requested, flat out refuse, or maybe even give the drink but leave out the alcohol altogether? What would you do? We'll answer that later, but it's not some imaginary ethical scenario, as the data shows that 13.5% of pregnant women in the US drink alcohol, and in the UK that was even higher at 41%. Around a third of those are classed as heavy drinkers as well, which carries serious risks to the pregnancy of a condition called fetal alcohol syndrome.
But doc, there isn't a professional medical body or country in the world that advises a safe drinking limit in pregnancy, so how are so many pregnant women still drinking?
You're right, there is a massive mismatch between the medical advice of total abstinence and reality, and it's leading to an estimated 119,000 babies being born with fetal alcohol syndrome every year globally. So I've made it my mission to find out why this is happening and what we can do about it. But there's no way that I could do this on my own, which is why I've teamed up with the OBGYN mom and reached out for your help, and the response has been overwhelming. Countless real mothers who had drank during pregnancy were brave enough to share their stories for us to learn from. All of them were enlightening, but you're about to hear from Sally, who has dealt with this issue on a level that most of us will never be able to understand.
To start off with, I'm a birth parent who drank alcohol while I was pregnant. I was 16 at the time, and when you are 16, you feel you are invincible, and you don't necessarily listen to the most recent medical statistics, etc. And I really didn't have any idea of what FASD was at that time. Never even was on my radar that my actions would cause an issue.
Sally isn't the only mother I spoke to who drank before knowing she was pregnant. It doesn't seem to be a coincidence either, as one 12-year study of 5,000 women in North Carolina, Texas, and Tennessee found that half of them drank in early pregnancy, with the vast majority lowering or stopping their drinking after realizing that they were pregnant. That was true whether the pregnancy was planned or not, but regardless of that, what effects does drinking have on a fetus in the real world?
My son, he is now 40, and he struggled his entire life. He struggled making friends, he struggled in school, he had behaviors. He also has a seizure disorder. I remember him being in 5th grade, and we got a call from the school, and he had been standing on the shelving or on the counter when the teacher was out, wrapped the cord around his neck from the drapes, and said he was going to jump off. You know,
That's not something you expect to get called about as a parent.
No, it really isn't.
When you had those nights out before you knew that you were pregnant, how much do you think you were drinking?
I think I maybe had 2.
Wow. So from such a small amount, such lifelong consequences.
Yeah.
After 32 years of not having an explanation for her son's struggles, he was diagnosed with one of the fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, or FASD. There's more to Sally's story, which we'll get to later, and I haven't forgotten about the bartender problem. But for now, what is FASD? Well, it's a collection of permanent physical, mental, and behavioral effects on an infant that has been exposed to alcohol in the womb. There are a few different types of these depending on what's been affected, but one named alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder would have no physical features, but with lifelong issues with functioning, including problems with coordination, behavior, attention, learning, and understanding consequences of their actions. We may never know what the child would have been like had they not been exposed, and therefore it's difficult to know what each individual's potential would have been. Jane has been struggling with this very reality after she'd already had one miscarriage and her second pregnancy wasn't going as planned.
One night I woke up in extreme pain, and I told my husband, I said something is wrong, and then when I lifted up the sheets, it was massive mess. I was bleeding everywhere. I was covered. And so now I feel like here I am, my body's failing me again. It was very massive amount of blood. So I thought completely I'd lost my pregnancy. I will admit at first, I didn't want to drink or anything like that, but it did get to a point to where I'm like, I just need something to, let's take the edge off a little bit. Let's try to, find my own way to cope, I guess. Like I said, it just wasn't quite registering in my brain that okay, I haven't had another period yet. We were having a few drinks on the balcony.
Yeah.
And I felt something, in my stomach, and I'm like, something's wrong. And what I was feeling was my baby moving for the first few times. They take me to get an ultrasound, and then he comes back and he said, "You're about 21 to 22 weeks pregnant." And I was like, "Excuse me?" He's like, "You need to go to a proper, OBGYN to see, but you're you're very much pregnant." And so, I went home with this news thinking, I'm not pregnant, something's wrong with me, to coming home and telling my husband, "Hey, we're 5 months pregnant." And this is, then that guilt of being like, well, I've been drinking all this.
Yeah.
And so, from that point on, I was very, monitored. I got with a regular OBGYN, but like, it's something I still feel guilty about to this day. It's something I still monitor my son. Like, I have to make sure, like, I'm watching for signs of, fetal alcohol syndrome. I'm making sure he's hitting his developmental milestones and things like that. So it's something that's still very present for me, I guess, today, even because I guess it makes me more hypervigilant to like monitor these kind of things in my child to make sure he's okay because of a mistake that I made. But overall, so far, I've not, thankfully, not seen any kind of issues or anything like that. He's about to be 4 this week.
Congratulations.
He's very healthy. He's a very strong, big boy, very capable. So in that way, I'm incredibly blessed because I know it could have been completely different.
Compared to Sally, who had 2 drinks during the first trimester, Jane had significantly heavier consumption, but with no apparent effects on her child. That might seem strange because it has been established that the more alcohol that you consume during pregnancy, the higher the risks. So why could there be such a difference between the outcomes? To explain that, we need to know how drinking during pregnancy would cause damage in the first place. I'm not drinking on the job, by the way, but if I were a pregnant woman and this was alcohol, first, it would enter the mother's stomach. It's then absorbed into the blood and makes its way to the placenta, where it can cross over into the fetal bloodstream. Their liver isn't as developed as the mother's, so the alcohol stays in the fetus's system for longer. It can then be directly or indirectly toxic to the fetal cells, mainly the brain. It can also reduce the blood flow from the placenta, limiting delivery of oxygen and nutrients to the fetus. Older mothers, those with vulnerable genes, poorer nutrition, or exposure to smoke, are more likely to have negative consequences. But what could be more important in our situation is when they actually drank. Sally had her drink early in pregnancy during the first trimester, when the fetus's organs are most vulnerable and least able to process the alcohol. On some occasions, the damage from that can be irredeemable when the body ends the pregnancy. One study found that when a mother drinks any amount of alcohol between week 5 and 10, the risk of miscarriage increases by 8% each week. Jane's child had their exposure mainly outside that window, but is there any point in pregnancy where drinking is safe? To find out more about it and some of the more severe consequences of drinking during pregnancy, you're about to hear from a specialist who frequently cares for pregnant women called Dr. Brooke. Thinking about the long-term effects of drinking in pregnancy, what kind of health impacts can that have on a fetus or eventually a baby after they're born?
So the main thing that we worry about, we're thinking about if someone is drinking alcohol in pregnancy, is the effect of this thing called fetal alcohol syndrome. And so that depends on when the baby was most exposed to alcohol, how much, for over how long a period of time. But it can affect them in terms of their their development, their structures as well. And there's a particular facial pattern that they can get that can be recognized at birth as a baby who's experienced fetal alcohol syndrome. And then there's other kind of behavioral and learning effects it can have as well.
And I know that some providers as well advise that drinking light amounts during pregnancy occasionally wouldn't really cause any harm. What would be your opinion on that, and what kind of evidence have you seen to be able to back recommendations like that?
Well, I guess ultimately we really don't have very much evidence because, and it's not through lack of interest, but ultimately, how are you going to set up a study where you give one group of pregnant women alcohol and the others none, and be able to compare the effects? It's just, so any studies or analyses we have are retrospective, so that's where we look back on people who did say that they were drinking in pregnancy, but they're not great studies. There's lots of different variables. So ultimately, from all of our best guidelines and best understanding of the evidence, there is no safe amount that we can say is safe in pregnancy. For example, when it comes to coffee, we can say you can have about 200 milligrams of caffeine in pregnancy. That's different forms of caffeine. You can get it in fizzy drinks, hot drinks, chocolate, but about 200 milligrams is a safe. So we've got a kind of safe window with that. With alcohol, we don't have. We can't say you can have 2 units a day or 2 units a week or whatever. There is no safe amount. We just don't know how much alcohol it takes for a fetus to develop fetal alcohol syndrome.
Our advice might be clear now, but we'd probably like to forget that in the not too distant past, we haven't got it quite so right. Now, you already know the UK has a high drinking in pregnancy rate at around 41%, but the highest rate is in Ireland at 60%. And why is that? We can just blame the drinking culture, but there was a time in Ireland where doctors advised pregnant women to drink a pint of Guinness for the iron content. Medicine has moved on, but some people still believe it, and it's no surprise as a 2017 survey in Ireland found that 17% of doctors still thought mild drinking in the third trimester is safe. Like, completely safe. We can't then blame pregnant Irish women for still believing what doctors told them 2 or 3 decades ago, but that isn't the only cultural side to this. In Nigeria, some women are told to have a glass of wine before birth to calm them down. Some tribes in India believe that customary alcoholic drinks consumed during celebrations of birth and death are unavoidable. The social damage from going against the culture would be seen as more harmful than what alcohol would do to the fetus. So we know that culture can play a part in this, but what about attitudes to the child themselves? We saw that both Sally and Jane cared deeply for their children, with their drinking being an accident.
For the vast majority of women or people who find out they're pregnant, most people know they stop drinking basically. Either they've already stopped or they stop soon after.
But that doesn't seem to be the case for all mothers. One mother on the record in a published report from South Africa said, "Yes, I was still drinking. I didn't care about this child. It was almost as if I hated this child. So whether I was drinking or not, I didn't care." Now, I can't imagine what someone's going through that would get them to that state of mind, but it's upsetting to hear. That's especially true since I haven't even mentioned so far that drinking can also increase the risk of preterm birth, stillbirth, and complications after pregnancy like sudden infant death syndrome. I know that hearing all that makes us want to judge. It's hard hearing that someone drank during pregnancy, whether intentional or not, but judgment just pushes struggling mothers further from support.
A lot of times, if you're a birth parent and you get told that your actions may have caused harm to your child, you're devastated and you will deny it.
That stigma might mean some mothers may not even tell their providers if they've drank at all. What happens then at all after birth if there have been harmful effects of alcohol? We've spoken about how drinking is a particular issue in Ireland specifically, and that same 2017 survey of children's doctors found that around 33% of them, mainly the more junior ones, didn't know what FASD is, never mind being able to diagnose it. That helps us understand why then, in Sally's case, she only realized her 32-year-old son had FASD when her grandson was diagnosed with it.
Our grandson that we have is now 14. He is completely opposite yet very much similar to his dad. He is functioning at a much lower level in reading and math. It's more difficult for him. At the age of 14, he is just hit the 5th grade reading level.
How did you then connect the dots between your grandson's diagnosis and what your son had been going through for his whole life?
I started looking up what FASD was and what the requirements to be identified as being the FASD disability, etc. was. And it just went, yeah, I screwed up. You know?
2 children with FASD in one family is unlucky, although it's unclear how much the grandson's mother drank during her pregnancy, since she's not spoken to them since 2015. Hearing all this might make you think that most people who drink even a small amount will get some kind of alcohol-related problem with pregnancy, but the risks with light consumption are low. But low is not nothing. In the US, up to 1 in 20 school-aged children have FASD, and just like Sally, around 80% of them do not have a diagnosis.
How important would you say, Sally, it is for the patients out there who have fetal alcohol spectrum disorder to get a diagnosis? Because about 80% of them are not diagnosed at the moment.
You know, it's incredibly important to get a diagnosis. If you don't get a diagnosis for a disability, you can't get the supports put in place. At this point, just simply because we have the diagnosis, we have supports in place for we could have supports in place for our son, but he was not a fan of what was being offered. The turnover of the people that were helping him was too high for his anxiety.
Mhm.
So family has stepped in to support him and to uh, help him where he needs help in that manner. But for our grandson, we have all the support that we could possibly need, which I know is a far cry from what most people have. Minnesota has a waivered services program, or, there's other things that are qualified for. So it's just the way it is.
Yeah.
So we know the potential risks and consequences of drinking in pregnancy, and we know that these generally get more severe with the amount of alcohol consumed, although that may not always be the case. But what bothers me is that it's a serious and widespread problem, and at a time when entire administrations are spreading fear around vaccines instead of working on this, what could we do to help? We'll get on to prevention, but the least we can do is not potentially cause these children active harm by diagnosing them with things that they don't even have. When we look at some of the symptoms of FASD, inattention, hyperactivity, impulsivity, and learning difficulties, do they sound familiar? They're also signs of ADHD.
But because he was so young, they wanted to label it as oppositional defiant disorder, ADHD, and all those other alphabet diagnoses.
An incorrect diagnosis here means being put on the wrong medication and potentially being prescribed ineffective types of therapy, which is the last thing these patients need after being dealt a difficult hand. But if it is preventable, then can't we just stop it happening in the first place? Well, yes, we've already established that many women who drink during pregnancy do so because they don't know that they're pregnant. That means that we need clear and consistent messaging from healthcare professionals. Most people know that there's no safe drinking limit in pregnancy, but do they know that both the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology and the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, wow, that's a mouthful, both recommend also abstaining while even just planning or trying for a baby? Videos like this one are one way to educate and spread awareness, but sadly I don't have the entire world's female population as my audience. That means the first method of prevention, education and awareness has to go way beyond this and even get creative. Australia understands that and has now introduced mandatory label requirements on all drinks from 2023. But this hasn't been plain sailing either, as there has been some strong resistance from beverage manufacturers, with some displaying it incorrectly, or for a third of products simply choosing not to add the label at all, since enforcement and monitoring has been lacking. Even for those who have seen the labels, awareness has increased, but with unclear data on whether that has actually reduced drinking rates or not. As part of education and awareness, we also need to address misconceptions like some people think that wine is safer than vodka, but the research shows that all alcohol, beer, wine, and spirits can be harmful. Now, the second strategy is support and resources. For the minority of women who are truly dependent, they are the most difficult to reach, but with the most to gain for each individual child if we can reach them. Many of those women will not be admitting their drinking to their doctor and will have deep ongoing issues that need support rather than judgment. For that, you can do your part by encouraging them to come and see us so we can get alcohol services, therapy, and management of their mental health conditions like depression or anxiety. As doctors and midwives, we also need to do our part by proactively checking with pregnant patients during their appointments on whether they're continuing to drink so that help can be given early. Partners of pregnant women, if any of you have made it this far, you can help by reducing or eliminating your own intake or create a more supportive environment for pregnant women.
If you are in a lifestyle which you're surrounded by a lot of alcohol and you are pregnant, I think it is very difficult to control those impulses.
We can all also make sure women know what local support groups and charities are available that can help them manage dependency and cravings. A third strategy is making sure that there are accessible alternatives. Yeah, that means alcohol-free drinks, but also social events in the circle with our trying to get or already pregnant friends that don't just revolve around drinking alcohol, to make sure that these future mothers don't feel isolated or left out in situations where drinking is expected. That takes us all back to our bartender problem, at which we would be legally obliged to serve the woman as she retains the legal right to make decisions on her own and for her fetus's body, even if they're deemed to be irresponsible by us.
It's not you're not allowed. It's we recommend you not to because of these are the reasons, and then you make the decisions.
The answer here is not restriction or removal of rights. The answer is empowering women with the right information, support, and alternatives to be able to make the best decisions for them and their incredibly cute future hellraisers.
A lot of times birth parents feel shame and they feel guilty. And I'm not going to say that I do or I don't. I don't really think I do, but my thought process in that aspect is you can't change what you did in the past. How can you help your child, your grandchild in the future? How can you educate other people so that they don't have children that have to go through the same issue that yours have gone through?